What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Turn the Jets podcast. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at Will Podland on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. TOJ Pod, all 32, presented by the CLNS Football Network, as well as, obviously, TOJ Talks on Badlands. Last couple episodes have been up on the Badlands Network, so make sure if you want to tune into my Joe Douglas reaction pod, obviously a bunch of other great stuff on there from Joe and Connor, Paul, Jake, Meeks, etc., and Dan, the whole crew over there. Did a pod on Saturday reacting to some of the leaks going on in the Jets building, some of the Aaron Rodgers stuff. Want to hop on here for a quick, 15 minutes or so and just talk a little bit about a few different things. And again, great episode by Peter Schrager and Joe Caporoso from earlier today. I know Joe and Connor will have some from kind of material out later tonight as well. But want to kind of quickly hop on here, get some stuff up on the feed. We'll be talking a lot more Jets Colts. As the week kind of progresses, we'll have an episode out likely, probably tomorrow to give you something to listen to on the car on Thursday, and then another episode probably on TOJ Talks on Saturday. Enough of the PSAs. No one came here for a bunch of fucking PSAs. Want to kind of hop into where the Jets are at in the news that came out about 24 hours or so ago. That Mike Tannenbaum, Rick Spielman, partnered with the 33rd team, will be helping the Jets in kind of a consultant role to help, assist them along the process of finding their next head coach and their GM. We'll talk a little bit more on Thursday episode about Rodgers, and that whole saga. I don't really want to, not that I want to get into it today. It's kind of repeating old stuff. It's competing stories, Rodgers versus Rossini, part, 157. We'll talk more about it. Rodgers has 6 games to prove potentially he wants to be here and potentially that the Jets want him to be here. Does he want to play in 25? Is he good enough to play in 25? Does another team want him? Do the Jets want him? There's a million things, and we'll talk more about that as the week goes on. I want to talk about the Mike Tannenbaum, Rick Spielman of it all, and kind of just potential names that I've gathered, in kind of my time the last 4 or 5 days, and maybe actually really since last Friday, talking to some folks really just around the league in terms of, from all kind of walks of players, coaches, executives, etc. Just kind of got some names to kind of compile from a head coach and a GM perspective, and what those guys may look like, in this role. The news comes out. Woody Johnson's again going to be using Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman. I want to kind of break down that a little bit and just what that may look like. My inclination is that the 33rd team's attached for the data that Mike and Rick will be able to use just from an analytical point of view, and also to help kind of prop up and to use the 33rd team name, which Mike founded and Rick's a part of. That's kind of the company name they're coming under. I don't think it's the contributors of the 33rd team and Adam Gase and I like Ari Alap and Ari Meirov and a bunch of other people that work at the 33rd team and Steve Palozo and Sam Munson, like all great guys and do a really good job on their content. They have they're not a part of this. So I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of, Adam Gase works there. Adam Gase isn't listed on their site anymore, for one. And for two, Adam Gase is not a part of this. The 33rd team was founded on being the 33rd team, meaning coaches, GMs, executives, even former players wanting to be able to contribute, people wanting to get back into the league, people that are in between jobs trying to find a way to contribute and be around other coaches and maybe pick up on things. Doug Peterson got hired right out of the 33rd team 3 years ago, and won a playoff game right away. It's just a kind of an example name. It's the Dave Wannstedts, the Mike Martzes, the Marty Morningwigs, et cetera, guys that have had success in the NFL, that are either looking to still contribute or the Joe Banners of the world, Rick Spielman, Mike Tannenbaum, et cetera. So, that's just kind of what the 33rd team is. It's a kind of an analytical and data-driven approach now from a lot of perspectives, and they do offer consulting. Obviously, you saw the press release yesterday, which was kind of funny, the timing of the press release. But all that said, I don't believe, and I think listening to Peter Schrager, listening to others, it doesn't seem like the 33rd team in particular is super involved here. It's going to be Rick Spielman and Mike Tannenbaum. Yeah, I guess I'll phrase it this way. Contrary to popular belief amongst my mentions on Twitter, with all due respect, Mike Tannenbaum was a good GM with the Jets. He's probably the best Jets GM not named Bill Parcells since the 80s. 57-55 record, 4 playoff wins, 3 playoff appearances in the 6 or 7 years there. Drafted multiple Ring of Honor guys, 3, I believe. Probably should be 4. David Harris should probably have his name up in those rafters as well. Drafted a Hall of Famer in Darrelle Revis. I believe I did the math yesterday. I think 11 guys he signed or traded for made the Pro Bowl. And I think 4 guys were all pros. My math might be slightly off. It's sometimes the alternate thing. It's whatever. Point being, the Jets were actually really successful. And not only was Mike the GM from 06 to 2012, yes, the roster at the end there got pretty ugly. The reason the roster got ugly is because they went all in from 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. Eventually, you got to pay the piper, and the Jets paid the piper at the end. Mike lost his job. Eventually, Rex lost his job. I know he has some interesting takes on TV that has nothing to do with what's going to be going on in this search. Mike is really well connected in the NFL industry. He knows how to interview in terms of like physically interview folks in a interviewing setting, and for a front office position, he's got great relationships. Mike Greenberg, a name I'll mention in a moment, worked for Mike Tannenbaum back in the day. Donna Ponte, a name that's been floated constantly, worked for the Jets for a long time. Where'd you get her start? Oh, with Mike Tannenbaum with the Jets. So these are some names that you'll see floated. On top of that, it's going to be Rick Spielman. And I think Jets fans should be quite excited about Rick. Not only does Rick know ball, he was a 2-time GM. He was the Vikings GM for a long time. I think people have heard of Justin Jefferson. Just a name, just a big name people may recognize. He was his final draft pick with the Vikings, a first-round draft pick. Pretty decent guy there. Not just that, but Rick has done this job before. He did it a year ago with the Washington Commanders, who were very well praised for doing something very similar, hiring Bob Myers and Rick Spielman to do this exact job, to vet candidates, to gather information, to do background on these candidates, to put together a list, to have kind of vetted out who might look good, who might not. Hey, this guy's ready. This girl's not. This guy's ready. This girl is. Whatever it may be. Compile a list, give their recommendations, be probably a part of the interview process, as Rick Spielman said today on his podcast on CBS. And these guys will kind of just 30 plus years of GMing experience. Guys who know the market, who understand the league, who've been in the league. Rick was a GM in the league 3 years ago. It's not as if he's long gone. And, again, Rick has experience doing this. Mike knows Woody, knows the organization, knows probably what may fit there, and knows New York. I'm not saying these guys are perfect. I'm just saying that there was a lot of other options. And Mike cares about the Jets. Whether people want to admit, he was with the Jets from 1997 to 2012 in very high-ranking level positions. He's a Bill Parcells guy through and through. So I just say all that to say, we don't know how much involvement they'll have. At the end of the day, Rick said it himself today. Woody and Chris and Jaime and then the rest of the crew are making the decision. This is not Rick and Mike making the decision, and they're not going to be the GM. So even if you didn't think Mike was a good GM here, which is kind of hilarious because the same people yelling at me, Joe Douglas deserved a 7th year. But generally speaking, I think this is a good thing. Again, football people hopefully influencing, and with something to lose, by the way, hopefully influencing Woody and Chris and company in a positive direction. This isn't Peyton Manning making a call with nothing to lose. This isn't Patrick Mahomes calling up and this is guys that have a reputation, their company on the line here. And if they want to continue to do this, which they clearly do, they're going to try to get this thing right between GM and head coach. Now on to the GM and head coach thing of it all. I kind of where I sit at the moment on Tuesday, November 26th at 5:50 in the afternoon. I tweeted out a list 3-ish weeks ago of guys that would be my initial guys, and I haven't really wavered off of that. I've been pretty steadfast about Mike Vrabel and thinking he's a top candidate here. Peter Schrager alluded to it. Zach Rosenblatt and Diana Rossini and others have alluded to Mike Vrabel being a good fit here. Connor and Joe have spoken about it as well. I think he's the perfect fit. I think that he fits New York. I think he fits the culture change that's needed here. I think he can get the most out of this roster. I think with the right GM and coach pairing, they could do really special things here in New York. He knows this division really well. He knows this market, etc. He's a tough motherfucker who is going to not sit around and, he'll go right back at Woody and Chris. He'll go right back at the GM. He'll challenge Sauce Gardner to tackle. He'll challenge, Breece Hall to hit the hole in game 4 as opposed to, it's not anything wrong with what Breece does. I'm just saying, my point being, like, he's a perfect fit. When you remove him, and this is if, the Stefanskis, the Zach Taylors, the Kyle Shanahans, et cetera, do not get fired, which likely none of them should be fired. They're all awesome coaches. And who knows if they'd even come here, but those guys would jolt right to the top of the list. Offensive minds, proven success in the NFL, young, looking for that next job. Those guys would make a lot of sense. If you move on to the coordinator route, and again, college coaches, Dan Lanning's not coming to the Jets, and the Jets are not paying Dan Lanning a $20 million buyout on top of $20 million a year. It's just not happening. I do think to get a Mike Vrabel here, I do think to get even some of these coordinators here, look at what Jim Harbaugh got last offseason. I believe 5-year, $80 million deal. Mike Vrabel's probably going to be in that ballpark. Maybe not quite that expensive, but maybe it's 5 for 65. And it's, hey, you're going to get $15 million a year, and you're going to work with the GM, have some personnel control here, and you're going to bring in your staff, et cetera. That's a real thing. In terms of the coordinator out, if you want the offensive side of the ball, the one name that's continued to stand out to me for weeks now, and I still feel really good about this, is a Liam Cohen. The reason I think that is, one, a McVay tree guy. He's got college and NFL play calling experience. And although he is a first-time play caller in the NFL, he's had immense success this year. Baker Mayfield, look what he's looked like, even better than I'd argue he looked like last year under Dave Canales, who ended up getting a job. I think Cohen could probably build a quality staff. I think that the way he calls plays, the way he's able to get – look, this Bucs team, not for nothing, Evans has missed a lot of time this year. Godwin's obviously missed a lot of time. They're got Bucky Irvin's a really nice young player, but, Bucky Irvin looks freaking awesome. Baker looks awesome. The way he's got Baker playing oozing with confidence. The guy that's just a name to me that, that stands out. The reason it also stands out is potentially the pairing with a guy like a Mike Greenberg or a John Spytek, the number 2 and number 3, out in Tampa Bay. Those guys are 2 names that I tweeted out earlier last week, and I think that could be potentially good fits here. They're Mike is, as Peter Schrager alluded to on the Badlands Network earlier, interned with the Jets, grew up a Jets fan, family's all out, all from Long Island and et cetera. And it could be a good story there. Spytek's obviously proven his worth, in Tampa, one of the best front offices in the league. From another head coaching perspective, the Aaron Glens certainly pop up, and Ben Johnson. I don't want to not mention Ben Johnson. I don't necessarily foresee Ben Johnson wanting to come here. And it's not because the Jets are some terrible organization. I just, he's a guy who said no to Washington a year ago that had the number 2 overall pick, a new GM he could have worked with, and all this cap space and new owner and all that stuff. And he had still said no. So to me, you wonder, is this a place he'd want to be? Maybe. Who knows? Maybe the Jets offer him enough money and he's interested. We'll see. I'm a little skeptical on that one. Aaron Glenn, a guy who first-round pick of the Jets, 8-year guy with the Jets who's proven his worth in New Orleans and Detroit, and by all accounts, unbelievable football mind. He's got the Lions playing at a heck of a high level right now. He's a guy that you certainly think to yourself, hey, this guy could be a really good fit here. But again, would be a nice story with the Jets ties. Jesse Minter, a name I think people are hot about around the league. He said the Chargers being the best defense in the NFL. And it's not the most talented defense by any means. He's a Harbaugh tree guy mixed with a Ravens tree guy. His dad's coaching, with the Chargers as well. Obviously, he's coached under Jim, both at Michigan and obviously here with the Chargers. I believe 41 years old. I believe he'd be an attractive candidate to any team, let alone could help build the culture and elite defense, here. Similar track to Mike McDonald out in Seattle, who Jets fans will see this weekend. Other names, I guess that, that kind of come to mind. Listen, the Rex Ryan route and the Mangini route, if Mangini wanted to be a senior consultant in a role that could kind of come in and potentially be kind of a mouthpiece, help evaluate talent in the draft process, interview people, help build the scouting staff alongside the new GM, I'm all for it. Mangini coaching, he hasn't coached, in well over a decade as well. And I don't know. not to be a hater, Mangini did a lot of really nice things here. Obviously, if Brett Favre doesn't get hurt, he probably never even loses his job, but it is what it is. Really worked well with Mike Tannenbaum. They've obviously probably have a good relationship with, and they saw talent a lot of the same way, and they were able to build a really, really impressive roster, and, that Rex and Mike eventually built on. The Rex thing, it would take a lot for me to feel like that would be the right hire, and a lot of people I had mentioned earlier to say no. Brian Flores is another name. I think Brian could do a really nice job here. I have skeptical questions around developing a quarterback and around how he would be with the New York media. He's just not a media guy at all. But all that said, he's a damn good football coach, would be a culture changer, is from the area as well. There's a lot of New York ties, if you're not sensing that already. Those are just some names that come to mind. Cliff Kingsbury, maybe, but I have real trepidation around the first half of the season versus second half of the season stuff. It's very scary. I'm not sure the Jets hiring a Zach Robinson, hiring a Dan Pitcher at this point. While as much as I love Dan, and it would be awesome, I don't know if they're at that level yet from the coordinator route. Bobby Slowick, absolutely fucking not. Would be an absolute disaster of a hire. So those are some names there, just to kind of think about, and names that I think at the moment I like, based on both culture fit, scheme fit, where the game's going. Most of those guys are younger, could build a culture, some offensive names, some defensive names, etc. On the GM round, just some names to kind of keep in mind, as this process kind of starts to unfold. Mike Borgonzi out in Kansas City, the number 2 out there. I think Mike would be a potentially really good fit here. We'll see if the Jets could convince him to even take an interview. We'll see. But certainly a name to kind of think about. 2 guys, as I mentioned, out in Tampa, Mike Greenberg and John Spytek. 2 names to mention. 2 guys out in Seattle, I think, to keep your eye on as well. Trent Kirshner, and Matt Barry. 2 other names that I think could potentially get interviews, have worked under John Schneider. Seattle's obviously been a really successful organization. Has done a good job at developing talent and things of that nature. Some names you've kind of heard probably before in other processes, maybe an Ed Dodds, a John Dorsey, etc. It's crazy Ed Dodds has not been a GM yet, but Chris Ballard has 1 million lives. He's a cat with 9 lives. So there's that. A Mark Acevedo down in Baltimore, John Lipford, in Houston, some other names to potentially kind of keep your eye out on. John Eric Sullivan and Tariq Ahmad, both Green Bay and San Francisco, respectively. Sullivan, the number 2 out in Green Bay. Obviously, they've built quite a roster, there. And then, Ahmad, obviously, the last 3 hiring cycles, San Francisco guys have gotten GMs, or the number 2s have gotten, I believe, last 3 hiring cycles, there's been a GM from that pool. So just something to keep an eye on there. And there's another names. And then Ray Agnew in Detroit is another one. Obviously, I think Jets fans are quite familiar with. Has been talked about a lot. Excellent scout. Maybe he brings in a number 2. He brings in a Don Aponte to run, president of football operations, kind of work with some of the cap stuff and kind of the football ops side. And they hire Ray Agnew to come in and be like, you're going to just scout the fuck out of college and pro talent and build us a damn good roster. And a good team here, not just a good roster. That's another name to mention. So a lot of obviously possibilities. I'll continue to kind of try to explore some of that. We'll talk more and more as things go on. But just want to kind of talk a little bit of some names to potentially watch on the head coach and the GM side of things as things stand here in late November. And then obviously talk a little bit about the 33rd team, Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman. One other note to mention, Chris Spielman, I believe Peter Schrager mentioned this, earlier, but Chris Spielman came in as that football czar, kind of partnership between the owner, to kind of help interview and hire a GM and a coach. And, Rick's brother, Chris, helped the Lions hire Dan Campbell, and Brad Holmes. So just names to watch there. Agnew, by the way, had spent time in LA, before, obviously, with Holmes before his time in Detroit. I'll be back on the feed Thursday or Wednesday tomorrow. I'll talk a little Seattle game and Rodgers, etc. Appreciate it for listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.